Alright, hello everybody. We're going to work on activity 7, which is our stacking pull toy. And I'm going to start at the beginning, which is making some of the more common pieces. And then we're going to get into how do you pull those pieces together to create an assembly. So this video should take probably about 20 minutes to get things situated. So let's work on it together. Alright, I'm going to start by making the body of a pull toy. I'm just going to make sure that this isn't too large. So I gave you guys some constraints. I didn't want it any bigger than 3 inches by 3 inches by 6 inches. That's just so things aren't really out of control with how big they are. So I'm going to go with block. And let's make this maybe 5 inches long. And I'm going to go with maybe 1.5 inches tall. And I'm going to extrude that out, and I'm going to extrude from the mid-plane. This is a nice little feature, so this will be a symmetrical extrude. So let me do 1.5 inches out. Okay, so that's going to be the start of my body. And now let me add some holes for the wheels. So I want those to be up away from the base. So let me do that. I'm going to sketch on the front surface, and let me draw a hole. Let me start by actually making a little reference line. So I'm gonna make this hole about 1/2 inch up on either side. So I'm going to use a rectangle to help orient where I'm at, and then I'm going to delete that rectangle when I'm done. So don't be afraid to kind of use geometry that you know about, right? To make some of these choices. So I'm going to make a hole. My hole I'm going to make a little bit smaller than a 1/4 inch. So let's say it's 0.24 inches, right? And I like that. So now I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Just left with that circle. Okay, so I'm going to exit the sketch, and now I'm going to cut that hole out. And it's smart. It knows, hey, I think you want to cut all the way through, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to replicate this on the other side. So I'm actually going to use this function called mirror, which is a nice way to kind of duplicate things. So it knows what I want to mirror, and then it asks me what plane I want to mirror about. So I'm going to mirror about the right plane, and that's automatically going to put the hole on the other side. So I've got holes for my wheels, right? So I'm going to stick one on this side, here, 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 and here, which is nice. Okay, let me add 2 kind of like smokestack things up top, maybe 3. Let's see how it goes. So I am going to sketch on the top surface. And again, I'm going to use some of the geometry. I'm going to make these about 1/2 inch diameter, maybe a little bit under. So 0.49. And then let me also set this distance. 0.75. So I'm just being strategic about where I'm drawing my circles and stuff. That helps with when I'm doing the manufacturing, so the cleaner I can make things, the better. So I'm going to replicate this guy, and I'm using this linear array, and I'm going to set let's do 3, and I'm going to set the spacing to be 0.75 inches. That's actually kind of narrow. Let me go a little bit more. 1.5. Alright, so I like the look of that. So now I'm going to cut those, and I'm not going to go all the way through on this. Let me just go 1/2 inch deep. So these holes aren't going to go all the way through. Just going to be kind of blind holes there. Alright, so let me kind of round the corners, so that's always a good idea. I'm going to put a big round on the front like it's the front of a train. So I'm using the fillet function here, and I put a big 1 inch round, right? It comes right up to that hole, which is kind of cool. And then if I want to round all the other corners, I can do that too. So let me use a shallower fillet there. So I'm going to do maybe a 0.1 fillet, which is really shallow. And I'll do that on that one, that side, and that side. Oops, and it accidentally filleted those holes. I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to need to go back and fix that. So I'm just editing that function, right? I can kind of clear what I don't like. Let's see, I want that surface, that edge, that surface, and that bottom surface, and let's see how that looks. That's better. Okay. Alright, so I've got myself the body. Now, I know you guys, so we can assign it to look like wood, so I'm just going to edit the material and go ahead and turn this into wood. And I'll just choose like a pine as a pretty common wood. So that's going to give it a wood finish to it, which is nice. And I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I will save it on my desktop. I've got a folder going. This is very helpful when you have assemblies to put things in folders. So I'm going to call this Training Pull Toy Body. Okay, so now I need to do a couple other things, right? So this is my first part that I made, which is nice, but now I'm going to do a few others. Let me start by making the wheels. So I'm just going to sketch a wheel, and I want you guys, when you're doing this, to please make sure that you take the measurements off of the actual wheels that I've provided you. So those wheels are, I believe they're about 1.5 inches in diameter. But make sure you confirm that. We want the right dimensions for those wheels. And I'm going to put a center post in there that is just a little bit over 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And then I'm going to extrude it. I'm going to extrude back 1/4 inch. Go a bit bigger. Okay, and there's a wheel. I'm going to give this a color, so I'm not going to assign it a material property, I'll just give it a color so we have some contrast to our model. I will make it like a white. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to save it as wheel. And I only need to make one wheel. I'm going to use this multiple times. And notice another thing I'm doing here is I'm leaving all these files open because I know that eventually I want to make an assembly drawing out of them. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make that little axle. So the wheels spin on an axle, right? So I'm going to start by sketching. I'm going to do a front plane. I'll do a little cylinder. I'm going to make this exactly 1/4 inch. So notice how I'm using my Smart Dimension tool to make sure that I get things to be the dimensions that I want. I'm going to make it 1 inch long. I'm going to add a little cap on the top of it. So I want you guys, when you're doing the axle, it doesn't have to be exactly like the axle that I've given you, but I'd like it to be close. Okay, so I'm making a little cap, and let's make that 0.4. And I'm going to extrude that as well, and I'm going to make that 1/8 of an inch. So there's a little axle. And let me just go ahead and make that white as well. Okay, and I'm going to save it. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I am going to make some of those smokestacks for my train. So if I go back to my pull toy body, right, I want some vertical posts that are going to come up from here that kids can actually stack things on, right? So let me make a few of them. It's just going to be a very simple cylinder. So the parts that I'm making aren't super complicated, right? And this is something that you're going to want to consider. You can make really interesting designs out of simple shapes. They don't have to be complicated shapes. Oops, let me go back into the sketch and make sure that's the right dimension. So I'm going to make that a 1/2 inch exactly. I'm going to exit the sketch, and I'm going to extrude. I'm going to do that same mid-plane extrusion, which is a nice little trick. I'm going to make it 2.5 inches tall. And let me give this a different color. I'm going to make this green. I'll make it a light green. Okay. Just call that a vertical cylinder. Alright, now let me make some shapes to actually start stacking. Okay, so anything that I want to stack is going to have a 1/2 inch hole in it, maybe a little bigger than a 1/2 inch so it can slide on that post, right? So I'm going to start by sketching, let me just do a couple interesting looking block designs, right? So I'm going to start with I'll do these little red blocks. So let me dimension those. I'm going to make it 1 inch by 1 inch. Whenever possible, you want to use nice regular dimensions, so it's easy to cut things to 1 inch, right? It's harder to cut it to 1.085 inches, right? So whenever possible, it's a good idea. Keep things regular size. Notice how I made this a little bit bigger than a 1/2 inch. Also, that does not look right. That looks like that circle is off. So let me fix that. Right there. Okay. Alright, I'm going to extrude this. And I'll extrude it a 1/4 inch. So a nice shallow little washer type design. And let me make this red. Remember, I want 3 different designs that you're going to stack on the top, so let me work on another one. Let me now do a circular feature. So I'm going to do something that looks maybe like a smokestack. Never mind. I don't want to do that. Let me do a washer. Let's give that a color. Orange. Alright, let's do one more shape. This time I think I'm going to do a triangle with a hole in it. So I like to make my triangles by going like this and cutting across. Trimming. And extruding. Put a hole in the base. if you want this hole to be dead smack center, we might have to sketch a couple lines. So I'm going to sketch some lines that help me identify the center of that plane. Just some maybe stuff that you learned in geometry class. That's where this comes in really handy. Okay, so I'm going to dimension that, and I'm using 0.55. Get rid of these construction lines. And it's going to cut all the way through. I'm a little worried right now that this might be a little too big. The original circle that I cut might be a little too big. Also, it didn't cut all the way through. So I'm going to go back in and modify this original rectangle or triangle to kind of cut the size down a little bit. So let me dimension that. Yeah, that's pretty big. I'm going to take that down to 1.5. I'm going to take this guy down also to 1.5. Yeah, that's a much better shape. Okay, so I'll give this guy a color. So I have all the parts that I'm going to use. Now it's a matter of pulling them together into an assembly. I've got all of my part files open. That's also a nice little trick. It doesn't have to be that way, but it helps. I'm now going to go ahead and make an assembly. Right? So I've been making individual parts. I'm now going to make an assembly. And if I have these part files open, you'll see they'll come up here in this window. So I'm going to start with the body of the pull toy, and I'm just going to click on that and plunk it down in space. Okay, there it is. This is the first object that I'm inserting into space, so it's going to be fixed, meaning this part can't move. I talked about this in our warm-up exercise for activity number 6, but this is just kind of a refresher. The first part that you put in tends to be fixed in space. You can change that, but for right now it's fixed, which is going to be useful. That makes sense that it's fixed. Now let me insert, I'm going to insert the vertical cylinder. And this vertical cylinder, I can move it around relative to the other part, right? And I can also spin it. Okay, so I've told it nothing. I've told the computer nothing about how this part should be oriented relative to this part. So it's now a matter of kind of telling SolidWorks how you want to assemble your design. So I'm going to use what's called a mate. Right? Mates prescribe relationships between parts. And these are the standard mates. That's what comes up by default. And these are the ones that are used most often. And of these, actually, you're going to wind up using coincident, concentric, and this distance mate more often than any other. So again, that would be coincident, concentric, and distance. Concentric means circles line up. The centers of circles line up. Coincident means that a point or a surface is going to line up. And distance means that two surfaces, two lines, 2 points are going to be a certain distance apart. So we're going to use those again and again. So let me start with concentric. So I'm going to make this cylinder concentric with this cylinder here. Oops. And you can see that lines it up. And I can lock the rotation of this, which is kind of nice, so that means it just won't move around, it won't rotate in space. But you'll see this can pass through, it can also move up and down. I now want to make it so that this surface contacts the bottom of this hole. So to do that, I'm now going to prescribe this coincident mate. So I'm going to say coincident, boom, that guy, and that guy. Okay, and for the purposes of your assignment, I'd like you to just focus on making sure that the parts are locked in relative to each other, meaning they're in the right position. I'm not as worried about how they move. I just want to see this as being an assembled pull toy. So I'm going to do insert components again. I'm going to do this manually, and then when I get to the wheels, I'm going to show you a different trick, on how to insert things multiple times. So I just pulled in another incident of this vertical post. I'm now going to do mate again. So if you missed it the first time, this is a repeat. So I'm going to go concentric, that lines that up. I'm going to go ahead and click lock rotation, that's fine. I'm going to pull it up a little bit so I can see the two surfaces that I want to be coincident with each other. And now I'm going to put this guy down into that hole by selecting those two surfaces. That mate is called, again, the coincident mate. Okay, and you can see that I've got a lot of hot buttons as I'm clicking through with these mates. That's because you tend to do this quite a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and last time insert a component. I'm going to pull in the cylinder again. Okay, so I have 3 instances of the same cylinder. This is the same part, I'm just using it 3 times. Okay, now I'm going to click mate. I'm going to do concentric, concentric, concentric. Okay, it's lined up. Now I'm going to pull it up so that I can see the base, and I'm going to do coincident. Coincident, coincident. So there we are. I got my 3 smokestacks on there, which is great. I'm going to make sure that at this point that I save. Okay, so I'm going to save this. This is a new type of file. This is an assembly. So you'll notice the extension on this is different, right? So before we were dealing with part files, now we're dealing with assembly files. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, guys, is I am going to insert, I'm going to start with the wheels, okay? So typically what I like to do is I'm going to start with the wheel first. And I am going to mate these. Again, I'm using the concentric mate, so I'm going to go concentric between this guy and this guy. And now I'd like those wheels to be a set distance away, so right now they can move a lot, right? So I'm going to make sure that those wheels are, let's say, 1/10 of an inch away. Okay, so I'm going to use what's called the distance mate. So I'm going to select this guy here. I'm going to set it to 0.1 inches. You can choose the distance, but 0.1 is a nice safe bet for how far away those wheels should be. And you'll notice that at this point, what happens is that wheel comes in alignment with the body, right? So now that guy is always going to be 1/10 of an inch away from the body. Okay, now that I've done that, let me do one more time with the wheel so you see all of the mates that I'm using, and then I'm going to actually use a copying feature that allows me to copy the mates along with it, so it helps when you're doing a lot of different mates. I'm going to insert the wheel again. Okay, and now I'm going to do a mate. I'm going to do the concentric mate first between the inside of the wheel and the inside of that cylinder. Now I'm going to use a distance mate, so this guy can pull out away from the body, but I don't want that, right? So now what I'm going to do is a distance mate. I'm going to set it again to 0.1 inches. I'd like all my wheels to be the same distance away. And I'm going to say that I want those two surfaces, the inner edge of the wheel and the back face of the body, to be 1/10 of an inch away, okay? All right, so I've got my wheels inserted. Let me show you how this would work with copying. So there is a way to basically, I inserted a part and used the same 2 mates. I did the same thing here as well, right? So this was very repetitive. You can imagine that gets a little tiresome. So there is a way to copy with mates. If this is confusing, go ahead and ignore it. You can always use the technique that I just showed you, right? Which is, just repeat the same commands. But I'm going to select copy with mates, and then it asks me which component do you want to copy with mates. I want to copy this one. Okay. Then it says, okay, well, where do you want it to be concentric? So it repeats the mates, right? It says, okay, I know you want to copy the wheel, but where do you want this next incident to mate? And I want it to mate there. And then the distance, I want it to be 0.1 away from this inch, this side, right? So there it goes. And this continues for me, so it's set up to do this over and over and over again. So if I had to insert 5 million wheels, this would be a good way to do it. So it's a very quick way to make multiple instances. Right? I don't have to go through that whole insert thing. All right, so I'm going to make sure that I now save. Right? And now I'm going to put in those axles. So right now my wheels are just floating out there. It needs an axle. So I'm going to insert components. I'm going to put in the axle. There's my axle. I am going to make sure that this is concentric. This is going to be concentric with any of these holes, right? It could be the wheel, it could be the... Okay. And I want to use that same mate, so I basically want this inner lip to sit fairly close but not completely touching the wheel, right? So I want that guy and that guy to be, I'm going to put it 0.05 inches, right? Just smidge them away. Okay, so now I've got an axle that runs all the way through. And you can see how I'm using my zoom feature, right, to really see what's going on with my design. And I'm also rotating it to get the angles that I want. Okay, again, I'm going to use the copy with mates feature because to put in the rest of my axles, just because that makes it super easy. So I'm going to select this part. I'm going to move forward. Now I'm going to say, okay, I want it to be concentric with that, and I want it to be that far away from that surface. Do it again. I want it to be concentric with that, and I want it to be that far away from, oops. Something happened. Oh, I went too fast. I went too fast. All right, concentric with that, and concentric with that, and that far away from that surface. Okay, good. Next up, concentric with this guy and this surface. Concentric with this guy. Okay, and that should be it. So I've got my axles all inserted. All right. Last part, I want to start stacking, right? So I want to start putting the stacking elements on there. So I am going to insert components, and I'll start with the circular washer. Let me put those on. Okay, so here's the circular washer. I want this guy to be concentric with this guy. And I'm going to actually have this sit directly on top of this surface. So what I'm going to do is a coincident mate. Coincident, that guy, and that guy. Oops. That's one element. Let me insert again. I'm going to put the triangle on now. Drop that in. Let me stack that on top, right? I can go ahead and put that on top of, it's lined up. And I'm going to use coincident again. I'm going to put this guy on top of it. Okay, a couple pieces. Now, here's another interesting one. Let's say I want this back surface to always stay lined up. Like right now it can twist around, which is kind of cool. But let's say I want it to be lined up, right, with the back. So I could use a parallel constraint. I could say this guy must be parallel to that, and it's going to line those surfaces up, which is kind of nice. Every once in a while the parallel mate comes in handy. All right, let me now insert, I'm going to see how many parts I can stack here. I'm going to use the, we call that the washer, this little guy. So I am going to stick this guy on the cylinder. Drag it up. And I'm going to stick it all the way down on the bottom. So I'm going to use coincident again. So you see how these mates are used again and again and again. So once you get the hang of the mates, things, oops. What problem do we have here? I would like this surface to be coincident with this surface. Okay. Whoa. SolidWorks is not happy with me right now. Alright, so the washer, what's going on with the washer? Thumbs up. I'm just going to delete that mate. So you can see every move that I make is recorded by SolidWorks, right? I currently shouldn't have any mates for this. Let me see. What's going on with this guy? Sure. Let me start at the beginning here. Okay, I'm going to insert component, pull in the washer. Now I'm going to mate. I'm going to make this guy and this guy concentric. Okay. Now I am going to make this bottom surface coincident with that. Okay, now we're happy. All right, let me add another, I'm just going to keep stacking so you get the idea. I'm going to add another triangle. And let me just turn this around. So to turn it around, guys, you're using the right mouse button. Okay, so I'm going to mate this guy and this guy. Oops. That's how it would kind of mate. That would be helpful. I'm going to use concentric, this guy and this guy. Then I am going to use coincident between the surface and this surface. And then I'm going to line up this guy and this guy as being parallel. Alright, and I'll do two more. Do one of these guys and maybe another washer. Okay, so insert, circular washer, gonna mate, coincident, use my like that. Now I'm going to insert one last washer. Concentric, boom, boom, and coincident, bottom surface, and that surface. Okay, so I've met all of my requirements. Right? I've got a stacking pull toy that has the overall geometry that I want, right? It's not too big, 3 inches by 6 inches by 3 inches. It has 3 different stacking shapes. I've used multiple instances of it, right? So I have 2 of each, 2 of the triangles, 2 of the cylinders, 2 of these little square washers. I have 4 wheels, and those wheels are approximately the size of the wheels that I've given you. Okay, so this is what we're looking for as a final product. Let me show you one other thing, which is sometimes it's nice to take a screenshot of this. The way that I like to take a screenshot is to do a print and then print this to a PDF. And this will come out as a nice image. We're going to ask you guys later in this workshop to actually show these images in a presentation. Okay, so we want to not only see your pull toy, but we want to see the design that went into it. All right, so this is a nice image from SolidWorks. So make sure you save. Okay, once you have this completed drawing, this is going to be what we work off of when we're working in the carpentry shop. So thanks, guys. Thanks for listening, and replay this as needed to get used to those mates.